Hi everyone, Tony Tonkin here from the Child Protection Party. Glad you could be with us today to talk about things that are important to you. And we hope that you join in and have a conversation with us about the issues that impact your life. So in order to do so, we welcome you to CPP TV. An opportunity for people to talk about stuff, any stuff that has occurred in your life that you'd like to have a conversation with us about. We had a conversation on Tuesday, Tuesday night, that was a ripper, to say the least. We had well over 1,000 people reach, and we had nearly 1,000 people view what we had to say. I'm buggered if I know what we said that had any importance whatsoever, but nevertheless, we had started the conversation, which was absolutely about nothing. It was a bit of a Seinfeld episode, to be honest, and here we are again having another conversation with you, and we hope that you join with us to have this conversation as well. And I'd just like to welcome my mate, my buddy, the man that keeps us going, Avery Hilditch. How are you, Avery?
I'm very tired after a long, hard day looking after my grandkids yesterday.
I know it's harder than having to work with us, isn't it? Really, you know.
It certainly is. It certainly is. Mind you, I wouldn't trade it for the world.
Yeah. And we'd like to encourage people to comment and to have a conversation. We've got a couple of interesting people that we're talking to today, and it's up to them as to how much they would like to contribute. And the first person I would like to welcome is my social work student from the foundation, Sunit. How are you, buddy?
Hey, Tony. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here and be a part of this conversation.
He's looking to his right because we're in the same room, and so just look at the camera, buddy. That's all you have to do. Good to have you on board, mate. You're a gem. And the other person that we have is Peter, and Peter's talking to us from his van, which is a new way of doing this production. So welcome, Peter. Good to see you, mate.
Yep. Thanks very much for Tony for inviting us. It's good to be here.
It's a pleasure, and I'm glad you could meet us from inside your cabin, buddy. That's extra special.
I'm isolating.
Whereabouts are you from, Peter? You're from New South Wales, aren't you?
I'm from Lake Macquarie, up towards Newcastle, New South Wales.
Yeah. So hope you're staying safe. That's the important thing at this time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Before we get started, I just wanted to do, which I normally do, is just to have a reflection on some of the things that are important to all of us. And this particular session today is really about everybody having a voice, whether your voice is heard, whether your voice isn't heard. And many people within the child protection system in particular find that their voice is not heard. And one of the reasons why it isn't heard is because no one gives a damn. So, and the important thing about the Child Protection Party is we do care. We care immensely about who you are, and we're particularly concerned about the impact a whole lot of issues might have on children. And remembering, and I say this probably every time, this is not just about the child protection system. This is about right across the board around kids' mental health, their well-being generally, their physical and mental well-being, and also their the way they're treated at schools, workplace, bullying at school, the way that they're being educated and whether that's sufficient enough for children, and a whole range of issues. Youth suicide is a particular concern to us. Alcohol and drug use is also of concern. So we just need to reiterate that it's about all these areas that are of interest to all of us, not just child protection. But today we will be talking particularly about child protection in relation to some things that I think Peter probably has to say. But there was an issue that was raised today that concerned me, and that was at a meeting that I had with the department. Now, I don't think the department really care too much about what we say here on the Facebook page, but interestingly enough, I was talking to Sunit earlier on today about a letter that I received, and I talked about this before, from the department suggesting that we be careful about what we say on our Facebook page, and I was reflecting on that, thinking, like, who cares? I'm not responsible for what people say to me. I'm only responsible for what I say out there to you. So I do ask people to be respectful. Please do not mention anything that can identify a child, because that's really unhelpful. But certainly talk about the issues that concern you. And today, in this meeting, interestingly enough, I was confronted by, I was with a client, obviously, and while with the workers there, we were talking about a kid that was self-harming in a bizarre way. I said to the department, look, you know, if you don't address this particular issue, it can come back and bite you in the bum, because if the child is harmed or even dies, heaven forbid, then, you know, the situation is not going to look good for you. And and it's kind of like they started to backpedal at that particular point. They started to see that as a threat or an insult. No, I'm sorry, it's reality. We need to make sure that we're looking after kids every possible way. And here was a parent talking about how she felt about the way this child was behaving while in care, and had only begun to behave this way while in care. So prior to care wasn't behaving badly at all. But once in care, she has been behaving badly. And interestingly enough, the department seemed to think that there is some form of therapeutic fostering which will help this child through the issues that she has. Now, the problem is that this particular child is now going to be told shortly that she's going on a GOM 18 order. The child's feeling very young, and that's going to be, she wants to go home. So that's going to be another layer that this child has to be concerned with at a point in time where she's extremely distressed. Now, I'm not suggesting that's going to push this kid over the edge, but I am going to suggest that this is another layer, and that the department doesn't know what to do with that. And while I was there, I could carry on about this forever, couldn't I, Sonny? But I just, you know, like, I don't understand why the department said to me, and they've often said this, and it's just true, so who can deny it, that they are actually the worst parent. Okay, we know that. You're not a good parent. But why don't you do something about your parenting? You ask everybody else to. Why don't you find different ways to parent? I don't get it. So maybe, Peter, that's something you could take up in terms of adoption. But how do we become a better parent when we're looking at things like you know, foster caring, kinship caring, and adoption? And so, Peter, perhaps you might like to reflect on any of the stuff I've just said.
Okay, for those who don't know me, I discovered my adoption 3 years ago at the age of 59 by a DNA test. But I'm also a foster carer, and I nodding my head in agreement with Tony there. And I've had children in my care who have needed some assistance, and it's not until things get really bad that they will have them assessed, because if they have them assessed, then they have to pay the foster carer more money because the child's been assessed.
Can I just ask a question there, Peter? Is there like a grading for kids that are in foster care? You know, so if you've got kids with really bad behaviours, or
if they have high needs, or they've been assessed as having, you know, some issues that require professional help, then the foster carer is entitled to compensation for the extra work that involves in that care. But because the NGOs don't really want to pay you more, and it seems to me that every child that comes into care is traumatised. They have separation trauma. Mm-hmm. And they should be assessed from day one and monitored, and they should have a relationship with a psychologist, or, you know, a social worker, that they maintain that relationship with them. What tends to happen is, when people talk about children going from foster home to foster home, what they don't talk about is there is a high turnover of staff, and children have a relationship with a caseworker, but the caseworkers might only work 3 days a week, and they turn over so quick, and the relationship's gone, and there's no ongoing relationship. And as Tony alluded to, they have this idea that they can somehow cure the children by a good placement, and it's much deeper than that. The children have got trauma, and as Tony said, they add another layer of trauma on. And from my perspective, adoption is another layer of trauma on existing trauma. It's something you don't need to add on. And I know adoption's a very controversial subject for a lot of people, but they're not asking the people with lived experience. And having, say I've only known that I've adopted for 3 years, that didn't mean I didn't have a uneventful and untraumatic life, because I didn't know what was wrong. I knew something was wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on it. So I lived with trauma, not knowing why I had trauma, and finding out that I was adopted answered a lot of questions for me. So you're looking at someone who has gone through that as a child, and I'm the result of adoption.
Can I just ask, Peter, whether it's any different, a child who's in foster care being told that they're in foster care until they're 18, right? They're not going back to see their parents.
Yep.
Do you think that's any different from, say, you being told that you're an adopted kid at the age of 6?
Not a lot to the child, but we forget that. Okay, whilst childhood is extremely important for adulthood, often these things manifest themselves in adulthood, that then they realise the consequences of having been adopted. It goes back to the Adoption Act. What does it actually do? It transfers ownership from one parent to some new parents. And you are severed from your biological family for life. I'm not related. I'm not legally related to my mother or my 8 siblings, and to me that is absolutely bizarre. And my argument is that if adoption is a child protection act, why does it not finish at 18?
What can you explain that further? So,
okay, if you consider that, if you consider adoption as a child protection act, then like other child protection acts, foster care, it should finish at 18 when you become an adult. If it's also a part of the Child Protection Act, why is there no ongoing monitoring of the child's well-being once they become adopted? In foster care, you have ongoing mandated monitoring of their welfare.
Well, I guess we hope that's the way it's supposed
to
be.
Well, that's right.
I'm not suggesting that it is, though. But I'm just wondering, though, Peter, can you explain then if a child has... So I don't know if this is what you mean, but if a child has to be in care because their parents just not parenting appropriately and it's dangerous for the kid, which does happen, is the child better, in your view, in foster care because at least they have contact with their family, whether it be once a month, whatever, they at least have that opportunity, versus adoption?
Absolutely. Can you still hear me? Because my screen's frozen.
Yeah, we can still hear you. You're still functioning, mate.
I'm looking at...
Oh, hold on. No, hold on. The YouTube just dropped out. Hold on. Is she coming back in? Yes, it's back on. Sorry, mate. Just dropped out for a minute.
Well, my screen's still frozen at the moment. But that doesn't matter. So can you repeat that question again? So
the question is, if a child needs to be in some sort of out-of-home care, right, and that they are placed in foster care and they at least have contact with their parents once a month, versus a child that is placed with adoptive parents where their rights have vanished altogether, is foster care a better environment for them?
I'm not saying it's perfect, but it's a better environment. I have lost so much in my life because I haven't known my siblings. I haven't known my mother. I haven't known my uncles and aunties and cousins. I haven't known my grandparents because I'm legally severed from them. That was gone. And my identity is shot. I struggle with who I am, and I'm trying to rebuild that the best I can and rebuild those relationships. Yep. I have, I've done foster care on, crisis care where they ring you up at 1 or 2 a.m. in the morning and say, "Have you got a bed?" To respite, and short term, which is anywhere from a week to 2 years. I've done long term in excess of 8 years, and especially the long term. Our house is an open house, and the child in our care, and is not really a child anymore, but they have a wonderful relationship with their siblings, and their siblings are who are adults and had been through the foster care system themselves. They arrive at our house unannounced to hang out, to take the child their sibling away for the day or for the night, or might pre-arrange to take them away on holidays. There's a very normal type of relationship with their siblings. They know who their siblings are. They know who their family is, and I think that's extremely healthy for that those bonds to be built and not severed.
So the point is, though, that you're in a unique situation, given that in recent times you've discovered that you're an adopted kid, and you know how that impacts you, and also as a foster parent. So I guess from the foster parent perspective, are there some significant changes that you believe needs to be made that would assist kids so that experience in itself wasn't as traumatic?
Yeah, I think they need to have, as I said before, that be assessed and maybe have a professional in a private practice that's going to be there for long term, that the child can build a relationship with them. They are in a professional manner. They can monitor them. They can identify any of their needs early, rather than wait until it's too late when they've been moved from one placement to another placement to another placement, and then they have a breakdown and try and self-harm and things like that. We need to be in there earlier and recognise that they are traumatised, and they need to be given help.
I guess
I've got a question, if I can.
Sorry, go for it, buddy.
Yeah. When you were saying about being adopted is traumatic, does that apply when a child is adopted because they're say their parents have died in a traffic accident, for example, and the kid is 12 months old or something like that? Does that apply then?
Matter to the child how they become adopted. They're adopted, and it's really about the long-term effects of that. And to quote Robert Tickner, he was a member of Parliament, and he's written a book called 10 Doors Down. And this is his experience was quite common, that although he knew he was adopted his whole life, he didn't really think about it too much. He had a career and became a politician, and until the day his son was born. And on that day, he was holding his son, and he realized, or had the realization, that this was the first person on the planet that he had ever met that he was related to. And that made him look for his mother. And he had actually put I'm not sure, he put the veto, or his parents, his adopted parents put the veto, or they encouraged him to put the veto, which is often the case, but whatever, he had a veto against his mother contacting him. And he immediately went out and cancelled that veto, and then went about trying to find his mother. And long story short, he did find her and spent 20 years in relationship with her, and cared for her and cared for her husband and until his death. But yeah, it's often not until later in life that you realise what you've lost.
Who
Got
can
it.
you explain who put the veto on that? Her mother.
Well,
mother
I'm not sure. I'm not sure he ever said in his book, but what often happens is the adopted parents who want to talk the child into putting a veto because I don't know if this is Robert's case, but in other cases that they say, oh yeah, the parents are no good, they're this and that. You don't want them in your lives. You don't want them coming to you knocking on the door. Put a veto out, and they do, and whoever puts the veto out can also take the veto off. And that's what he did as soon as he realised what was missing from his life, and he had the veto removed.
Can you tell us a little bit more, Peter, though, about being a foster kid and versus being an adopted kid, and like what are those two experiences as like? Are they, because you're saying that you didn't know about your biological parents until only a few years ago. So I guess you must have been only in your 20s then, mate, given that you're so younger looking now, and that so it took some while. So to know about your biological family your entire life and being in foster care, you're saying seems to be a stronger advantage than being an adopted kid and not know.
You had me laughing there, so I've got to re-go over your question again. So saying that, can you recap the question again? Sorry, mate.
Yeah, sure. So being in foster care and knowing your biological family is more significant than being an adopted kid and not knowing.
Yeah, for longitudinal outcomes as an adult. Everyone focuses on the period of childhood, and they forget that the child is a child for a relatively short period of time, 18 years or so, and we've got to look at the life experience. And there's no independent longitudinal research done in Australia on the outcomes of adoptees. And there's a very good reason for that, is it's all hidden in secrecy. Even though they talk about open adoptions, but open adoptions don't guarantee that you have that contact with family or even know that someone could be adopted today in open adoption, and if the adopted parents did not tell them that they were adopted, they could find themselves in exactly the same situation as I found myself in 3 years ago. Whether it be a 20-year-old, whether it be a 30-year-old, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90-year-old. It's all up to the adoptive parents who don't want to lose the child.
So and that was my next question to you. Actually, was if you could draw a comparison between being having an open adoption, which I think is still fraught with danger because who decides how open it is?
That's nail on the head.
Yeah. So, and like an open adoption could turn out to be a closed adoption because the adopted parents may say, well, you've never seen your parents because they're not appropriate or whatever. I don't know, but they usually make up an excuse. So, what's your view on that?
Well, I was in open adoption for 9 years.
Oh, how'd that work out?
How's that work out? Because New South Wales opened the records 9 years before I found out. But just because the records were open didn't mean that I knew the records were open. I didn't know I was adopted. And this leads into the argument is how many other people like me are still out there who still don't know they're adopted, don't know their birth certificate is fake because the government makes fake birth certificates. They cancel your original one and they make a fake one that says that you're born to your adoptive parents. That doesn't matter if even if you're 16-year-old and adopted, they'd still say you're born to your adoptive parents. It's as if born to. There's all these people like myself who are there. Surely the government has a responsibility to let those people know in a controlled environment that this is the case, rather than them finding out, like I did by DNA, or is one adoptee that I know found out when their partner left in divorce, and the parting words were, "Oh, by the way, you're adopted," as a final blow. You know, the government made the mess. The government is responsible to let these people know.
And there's JJ's asked an interesting question on our comment section too, mate. And he says, can foster carers file adoption paperwork to adopt children before a court hearing is finished? So I guess he's saying, can foster carers, just file for adoption because they've already got the kid, and even though it still might be going to court or whatever.
I don't think so. Yes, it would depend on the state, but as far as I'm aware, you can't. But I don't know. Maybe you can. I've never tried to adopt anyone. I'm not inclined to.
I'm sure you're not.
I've had a lot of foster children, and I've never wanted to adopt any of them, and I didn't. It just never occurred to me that that was a good idea.
I guess the question is there because, to a large extent, I guess people see foster care as a avenue towards adopt a kid. So there'll be people that'll put up their hand to have kids in long-term care, and with the view, I guess, that they will always have that kid until that child turns 18. So doesn't foster care then become sort of a pseudo adoption process?
Yes, except it does not sever you from your biological family, and that is a big thing. Yeah, and not just family; it's family history. It's your culture or cultures. In my case, Aboriginal and Italian. I value both those cultures, and I didn't get access to any of them. There's one of my apart from not ever knowing my father because he died in 1982. Before I ever got to meet him, is that I'm not bilingual. I would love to have been bilingual. I try and communicate with my relatives with Google Translate. I'd love to be able to have a conversation with them and understand all the intricacies of and dynamics of the family. And the other thing is family medical history, vital family medical history. For 59 years, I was treated on my adoptive parents' medical history, and wrongly so. There was things there that I was treated with that I shouldn't have been treated with.
Yeah. And we've got a message here from Sharon White.
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, well, Sharon, Sharon, it just amazes me whenever we're talking about adoption, even though we don't advertise it. There you are. Amazing. And she says you still lose your birth certificate, ancestry, and identity, whether it's closed or open.
Yeah,
I guess she's right.
That's true.
Yep. So,
I can tell you Sharon knows everything about legislation. She's very
amazing. She's amazing. Absolutely amazing. And I guess, wouldn't it be interesting to have you and Sharon on, having a discussion between the two of you about all of this?
You'll have to talk to Sharon about that. She's shy.
Well, I've not known Sharon to be shy. When did that happen? She's whenever I've met with her, she's extremely forthright. But Sharon, the invitation is there for you to drop on too, because I think it'd be an interesting conversation for you and Peter to have to advocate for yourselves and to develop your cause. So now, Avery, have you noticed any other?
No, there's been a couple of comments there that you've picked out there. The comment that Sharon made, JJ's comments, and JJ's questions. Shania Bridger was in. She agreed with a couple of things you said something was a good question, and you asked a couple of questions. She said they're excellent questions.
Well, of course they are. I'm a social worker.
And she also said that to one of the questions that it's most definitely contextual, as each individual they'll differ in their experiences.
Yeah. Yeah,
I thought
absolutely.
that
I think that's a really good point, though. Is that everybody's experience is different, regardless of the fact that Avery's left his phone on and now has to answer it. But you're okay, Avery. So,
I'm
but
okay.
but everybody, but there are some people that do, regardless of the way we might argue legislatively, morally, all that sort of stuff. There are some people that are more than happy with their adopted experience. Peter, would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, well, it's not a question of whether you had good parents, bad parents, and often we hear about foster care and we hear some of the worst things that happen, but what we don't hear is about the worst things that happen in adoption. And with my contact with lots of adoptees, I hear some horror stories. We just had a Royal Commission to sexual abuse of institutional abuse, and a lot of those were adoptees, but who had experienced abuse within institutions. Yep. But adoptees who had experienced abuse within adoption and not within an institution were not allowed in that commission because they were deemed not to be in an institution. They were now adopted, and the government was able to wash their hands of it. Going back to my story about or point about care, once you're adopted, you're no longer in the government's care, and these people weren't allowed to have their voice. And the headline of this discussion is about people having their voices. And these were children who were abused, and again don't have a voice.
And can I just ask you then, Peter, is there like this idea that that adoption is because it's sort of propagated by Furness and Jackman, and I wonder whether there's this idea that adoption is a really holier than thou sort of solution to the child protection system, and foster care is just like its second, third, or fourth cousin. Yeah,
I could talk a lot about.
Be careful, mate. Be careful.
Yes, I'm going to be very careful. And
I'm being careful.
That's why I'm not going there. But I could talk a lot about it. But you could say they are my nemesis. But we only got to look at where they're coming from. They're coming from the United States as expats. United States has approximately 140,000 adoptions per year.
Jackman's living back in Australia now. You know that, don't you?
I don't know where he's living.
I'm
not stalking him, mate, so I don't know.
I speak to him regularly.
All right. But anyway, there's 140,000 adoptees adopted in America. America has a population 13 times Australia. Australia has around about 300, maybe a little bit more now, but about 300 a year. All right. If you multiply 13 times 300, you get to 3,900, not 140,000. There is something wrong with that picture. And to promote that we have 48,000 children in care that need to be adopted is misleading, deceptive, right? We know that half of those children are in kinship care. Now, if you're in kinship care, why do you need to be adopted? Why didn't it doesn't make sense. And another percentage of those children will go back to their biological families.
Yep.
And the number gets lower and lower and lower. 48,000 is just a headline grabber, and it's not a fact.
So what you're saying is that they're taking the sum total of children in care and suggesting that sum total represents the number of kids that potentially could be adopted.
Yes.
And we know that isn't true.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, but I'll just back to that original question, though, because I don't think you answered it, Peter, to be honest.
Sorry.
But it's about... It did. I mentioned Furness and Jackman, and that did it for you. But it's just that, there's this effort amongst the middle and upper class, it always strikes me, to see adoption as the the way by which they are contributing to society by saving these kids from a fate worse than death.
Well, yeah, this is. I got distracted then. My granddaughter's come back and mother's here to pick her up, so they've got the car going. The question, that they're trying to save them. This is it's not about saving children. In the most part, it's about childless couples or even singles.
Yeah.
Desire to have a family, even if that means, taking someone else's child to do so.
Yeah, I think that's quite an important way of putting it. So who's doing the stealing? We're stealing a child from a parent who may. I mean, a lot of the people that we work with, we believe, could still have their children in their care if it wasn't for the fact that the department had another version of events that prohibited that. But there's this bank of kids. So I often wonder too, and just we'll finish off with this too, I think, Peter, because I wonder how many kids get adopted that potentially could remain with their biological parents anyway, and the impact that has on the biological parent, not just the kid.
It has impact on the biological parents. It has impact on their siblings, grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins.
Yep.
And it has impact on children, the adoptees' children and grandchildren. It's intergenerational trauma. I know that my discovery affected my children, and to an extent it affects my grandchildren, because some of them were old enough to understand, or not understand what was going on.
Yeah. There's another question by JJ, which I think I know the answer to, but we will ask the question anyway. Does a bio parent have any rights to say no for foster carers to adopt if an 18-year order has been accepted? I believe the biological parent does have some form of contributing to that decision, do they not?
Except in New South Wales.
Oh,
in New South Wales, if they haven't been granted custody back of the child within 2 years, the judge can order adoption without any input from the biological parent. The biological parent has one chance, and one chance only, to stop that process is by putting in what they call a Section 90. From what we know is, once the Section 90 form or application goes into the department, it seems to take an incredible long time to process. And for some reason, that process time goes, sorry, your 2 years are up now.
Oh, how convenient.
How convenient. I believe I might have sent you a report from the...
you did?
Yes, from the... I'm trying to think the name of it now. Family is Culture report by Dr. Davis, Professor Davis, and it was out of home care for Aboriginal children, but same thing. It's the same system, and it was scathing of the system, and there's 125 recommendations came out of that report, but those recommendations could equally be for non-Aboriginal children. Yeah,
absolutely. And I guess the point that we're making here is that, to me, this stuff is still like an open debate. Like this, there's no end to this. As long as adoption is on the table, there's people like you and Sharon who'll be raising some objections to that and the way that it's implemented and the fact that it's there at all.
Yep.
And I guess our issue from the Child Protection Party's perspective is, at what stage do the children have a voice in any of this process as well? Whether that be the child protection and kids just being removed and placed in foster care, or whether someone's making decisions for them about being in adoption. And then at the end of the day, what impact does either of that have on these kids in terms of the way they conduct their lives and so on? And I think the thing that you bring to the table, Peter, that I think is really important is that it doesn't matter how old you are. it still impacts you.
Yep, absolutely. And you asked about the voice of the children. There is an actual voice, and it's called the United Nations Charter of the Rights of the Child. And we believe that adoption breaches a number of those sections of that act that Australia's a signatory to. But I guess that being a Commonwealth and then being states, they try to duck and weave and avoid that, but they shouldn't. It was that was it gets nutted out as to what child rights were and what their human rights were, and Australia agreed with that, and the states should uphold that and uphold the spirit of it.
Yeah, and I read an interesting article just the other day from the Human Rights Commission. It was actually talking about the rights of masks, believe it or not, but it did highlight the issues that sit around the declarations that we've signed, which have no legal standing in our country whatsoever. They could be taken to the national court and all that sort, international court and all that sort of stuff, but we don't have a Bill of Rights, for example, that may ingrain some of those rights, and I think that's an issue that the Child Protection Party, incidentally, Peter, has to take up too. How are children's rights manifested in a society where we don't give a shit until it's our kids that seem to be taken, or until we're the ones being taken, And the most powerless people in our society, the most vulnerable, are the ones affected, but we don't have any rights to actually support them around any of that.
Yeah, exactly. We lost our Bill of Rights when they took the Queen. I'm not sure the exact process, but the Queen. We lost the Privy Council, and we separated from England, and and we lost our access to the Magna Carta. That was our Bill of Rights, but we did that.
1978. I can't remember what it's called, but I know the one you mean.
Yeah. The other thing that's worth noting too, Peter, was that it took us almost 10 years, I think, before we signed the Declaration of the Rights, the Convention to the Rights of Children. So it was passed by the United Nations, and then we haggled about it as to whether to sign it years and years later. Now, to me, it's a fait accompli. I don't understand why it would take so long to haggle over something as significant as that.
And it was instigated by the USA, who never signed it.
Yeah, that's right. Absolutely. How bizarre is that? Crazy shit.
And I read where the United States response to The Hague about inter-country adoptees, that if a child, their stance is if a child is trafficked, stolen from another country, and trafficked to the USA, and they happen to find themselves in adoption, then America is not, or the USA is not compliant with that trafficking. And I just think that's just bizarre. They know that these children were being trafficked, and just the fact that they turn up in America and then they become adopted, that makes it all right. And they're not I'm trying to think the word, an accessory to trafficking.
Yes, and I saw a video recently too. Goes to show I watch too much YouTube, but it was talking about United States being the epicenter, not just for the COVID-19, but for also human trafficking, of which, of course, many of those that are trafficked are kids. Yep. And, so I guess at the end of the day, no, actually, Peter, are we stuffed? Like, is this pushing shit uphill, or do you think there's just a lot of work to be done?
But we're doing a noble thing.
Yeah, well, I guess we're kind of doing our best, aren't we? So I just want to thank you, Peter, for being with us. Really do appreciate it. You're an amazing bloke. And I hope that we can have you and Sharon on at some point. I've got
Yeah,
to,
that would.
now Sharon has been logged on. She said that I think she said that she would. Sharon, make contact with me or Avery so that we can organise our next feed. You can have a chat to us, and perhaps Peter might be out of his van by then. Who knows? He might be in another place. But you've done pretty well, mate, considering you're doing this for the.
Yeah, I still got a little bit of battery left in my laptop, so.
Oh, you're doing it from your laptop. Well done, buddy. And I just want to go to Avery before we close off. So stay with us, Pete, if you wouldn't mind. So, Avery, have you got any feedback or any responses to anything that's been said? And then I'm going to go to Sunit so that he can offer us some advice and some wisdom from India.
The only thing I would say is that we've been talking about adoption all this time. As I mentioned earlier, Peter's working with Wendy on adoption policy.
Mm-hmm.
It would be good to get input from other adoptees around the country.
Good point.
And they can contact Wendy by writing to wendy.hawkins@childprotection.party.
Can you put that up on the feed there, if you wouldn't mind? Just type that in. I think that's a great idea. And Peter, we need to keep you in the loop around that policy as well, and also Sharon, so that Sharon, you're invited as well, I guess. Of course you are. And Sunit, the man from, so this is broadcasting direct from India, and we have Sunit here as well. Hey, buddy.
Hey.
So, have you got any comments about any of that discussion?
Well, I'd just like to start by saying that, Peter, I have so much respect for you. You've been through so much, and for the work that you do. It's well, in India we don't have so much involvement of like the government in these matters, and forced adoptions and things like that. So it reminded me of a story about my cousin on my she's on my mom's side, and the thing is, on my mom's side, my relatives tend to kind of not talk that much about things. Like, they don't discuss family matters very extensively, especially in front of children. And on my dad's side, everyone's really vocal, and everything is discussed. Children are treated as adults, and sensitive information is shared with them. Now, what happened was that my cousin on my mom's side happens to be adopted. Something that I don't know a lot about. I haven't inquired too much about it. I found out a few years ago, actually. And she was in the car, and she actually met with my cousin on my dad's side for the first time. And now, in conversation, my cousin on my dad's side had found out that my other cousin was adopted, but she didn't know that my cousin didn't know about this. So when they were actually engaging for the first time, my cousin on my dad's side actually just brought up in passing. She said, "Oh, you're the one who's adopted." And my cousin on my mom's side was just completely taken aback. She didn't know what to say. She it just hit her, and I feel like it was the worst way to find out. And I would love to have a conversation with her about that, and about how she feels about that, whether she's gone back to try, whether she's ever been curious about her parents and like her biological parents, and where they came from, what they did, whether they're still around. So it's definitely a conversation that I want to have, and everything that you've shared today with us, Peter, was eye-opening. Thank you for that. It's been really nice being a part of this conversation and just listening in.
Yeah, thanks, Sunil. And I think that does raise an interesting question, just in terms of the way different cultures view things like adoption, and whether we do kind of see it differently. I mean, I don't know, Peter, whether there's I guess there is an international organisation around adoption that. ICAV, Inter-Country Adoptees Voices, and
yeah, they're very active in that, and they have a huge network around the world. And
Yes, sorry, mate. Go on. Yep.
Oh yeah, they do. I met at another forum a adoptee from Colombia, and he was a twin, and they went back to Colombia and met his mother, and he was heading back that this international adoptee community had organised to have work for him, so he can go back to Colombia and be employed and learn the culture while he's there, which I thought was a wonderful thing. Thing to do, and so they're very organised.
Yeah, and I don't even know why I mentioned that now, because I just remembered that about 5 or 6 years ago, my wife and I travelled to Tallahassee in Florida to an international conference on adoption. I forgot all about that, where my wife was giving a paper. It's the only reason why I was there. I was carrying her bags and her expertise in foster care, so she had a conversation with that. But it was a fabulous conference, and it had lots of people internationally, and lots of people who had experiences, I guess, from South Koreans that were adopted in the US, and how some of those as adults went back to find their parents, that sort of stuff. So I noticed that I think we're just dropping out again. So, oh no, we're just reconnecting. I don't understand why I was doing that. Anyway, look, Peter, thank you very much for being with us. It was absolutely fabulous. We love having you with us. And thank you for all the work you're doing around adoption in Australia. You're making a difference, and we really appreciate it. Thanks, Avery, for being with us as well. And thank you, Sunit, for your contribution too, mate. It was good to see you. And we wish you all the best. And take care. And particularly at these particular times, everybody, be safe. Bye.